Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Roundup August 2020 edition. We hope you are safe and healthy. So, in today's Roundup, I am accompanied by my colleague Shubham Agarwal. So, in today's Roundup, what we'll be covering is e-invoicing, recent news, and the legal precedents. So before we start, two major reforms which government is planning to do in the GST law are one, e-invoicing, which is likely to be implemented from October 2020. This is the status as of now. So we'll be discussing in detail about e-invoicing. So some of you may have turnovers less than 500 crore. So government plans to extend it even to the taxpayers whose turnover is more than 100 crore. So it's important for everyone to know. Secondly, is the limit of 500 crore really a limit of 500 crore, or there are some things hidden in that? So is there a possibility that companies having turnover of 300, 400 crores may also get covered? The answer is yes. So we'll be discussing detail in that as to how turnover of 500 crores will be computed for e-invoicing purposes. Apart from e-invoicing, the second major change which is likely under GST law is the return filing system. Even though nothing much is in public domain as of now, but yes, the government is likely to introduce 2B. So most of us are still not done with 2A. We have monthly reconciliation issues, etc. in GSTR 2A. So the government is planning to introduce GSTR 2B. So whatever is available in public domain, we'll be discussing about that as well. With this, I hand over the session to Shubham, who will run us through e-invoicing in detail. Shubham.
Thank you, Puneet. Good afternoon, everyone. In the segment of e-invoicing, we will walk through the practical concept and some legal intricacies related to invoicing. So broadly, we have divided our discussion into four broad parts. In the introduction part, we will go through the basic concept of e-invoicing, and in the process part, we will walk through the detailed process flow of invoicing, followed by some practical difficulties faced by the taxpayers, which are being answered by the government through some relevant FAQs. And then finally, the way forward for the taxpayers. It means what the taxpayer should do to implement e-invoicing in their businesses. So let's start. Since the advent of GST, we have seen that the prime focus of the government was on the automation and the IT-enabled tax administration. Be it the planning to make a robust GSTN portal for all the compliances, and even the communication between the taxpayer and the department, or the e-waybill system. We see invoicing as a next step towards the automation and IT-enabled tax administration, which will be achieved through use of machine-readable form of data. Under invoicing, a machine-readable form of data will be used, which can be readable by the systems at the government end as well as at the taxpayer ends. It will also help the taxpayers in solving their reconciliation problems, as we have seen that since last few years, a reconciliation has been a major pain point for the taxpayers. Taxpayers are still struggling on the reconciliation. So we see that e-invoicing will help a lot for the taxpayer in reconciliation, as the data will be seamlessly integrated between the GSTN portal, the buyer as well as the seller's end. Further, fake invoicing has been a major pain point for the government. We have seen that since last few years, a few fake invoicing rackets has been busted by the government, making injury to the tune of even thousands of crores of revenue to the exchequer. So we see that fake invoicing will be curbed to a great extent by the invoicing. Now let's see some major highlights of the invoicing. As of now, e-invoicing is being made applicable from 1st of October 2020. Initially, e-invoicing is applicable for large taxpayers having turnover exceeding 500 crores, and e-invoicing will be applicable only for B2B transactions. Interestingly, government has clarified through FAQs that if a taxpayer will making multiple attempts to generate e-invoice for a B2C transaction, then even the access to the e-invoicing portal for such taxpayer can be blocked. Some peculiar features of the invoicing includes invoice registration number, which is a unique code. It will be assigned to each and every invoice, each and every e-invoice registered across the nation, and it will be a unique IRN code for each and every invoice across the nation. And quick response code. It is a code that carries the major particulars of an invoice and digital signature. Further, APIs has been released by the government in public domain. Taxpayer can access the APIs at the below mentioned link and test the readiness of their ERP environment for the e-invoicing, and they can also generate dummy invoice to test the system, to test the compatibility of their ERP with the government system. So initially, in March 21st, 2020, e-invoicing was made applicable for taxpayers having turnover exceeding 100 crores in financial 2020. Later on, on July 30, 2030, government came up with a notification exceeding that limit to 500 crores. Sorry. It means as of now, e-invoicing is applicable for taxpayers having turnover exceeding 500 crore rupees in financial year 2020. So now we will dwell into some legal aspects and practical intricacies relating to invoicing. As we have seen that the pivot for the applicability of invoicing is the aggregate turnover. So we will understand how this aggregate turnover is being calculated, and then on which businesses and the type of documents invoicing is being made applicable, followed by inconsistencies between the present GST law and the e-invoicing scheme as introduced by the government. So now let's start with the calculation of aggregate turnover. Aggregate turnover is the sum total of turnover declared by a taxpayer across all the GST registrations coming under a span. This turnover is not equal to the turnover declared and the books of account, means financial statements. This turnover could be different from the turnover declared in the financial statements, as the turnover declared in the financial statements is the turnover calculated as per respective accounting standards, whereas the aggregate turnover is the turnover calculated as per the GST law. For the applicability of invoicing, this aggregate turnover will be calculated for financial year 2020. And if the aggregate turnover for a taxpayer exceeds 500 crore rupees in financial year 2020, then e-invoicing is applicable on such taxpayer from 1st of October 2020. This turnover, aggregate turnover under the GST law, will include turnover of taxable supplies, exempt supplies, which in itself includes non-taxable supplies as well, and of course turnover of export. So we will now take some examples. Like suppose there is a stock transfer between multiple registrations of a same pen, then such a stock transfer will also be a part of the aggregate turnover. Sales return. Suppose a business or taxpayer makes a sales return through tax invoice. In such case, such sales return will also be included in the under the definition of aggregate turnover. Interest income. Interest income, being an exempt supplies, will also be a part of aggregate turnover. Interest income could be interest on bank FD or loan given to any corporate. Any kind of interest income will be included in the part of aggregate turnover. Now, interestingly, government has identified such taxpayers those aggregate turnover exceeding 500 crores in financial year 2020, and they have started sending mails to such taxpayers to intimate them regarding the readiness of the system and to apprise them regarding the applicability of e-invoice from 1st of October 2020. I hope many of you have already received such mails from the government. Now coming to the applicability. E-invoicing is applicable on all registered persons except units running their business from the SEZ, insurance and banking companies, GTA and passenger transport service providers. Now coming to the documents, on which documents e-invoicing will be applicable. Interestingly, as the name suggests, e-invoicing, it indicates that the e-invoicing will be applicable only for the invoice. Is it so? Interestingly, this is not so. A taxpayer is required to intimate invoice, debit note, as well as credit note to the e-invoicing portal for complying with e-invoicing. Government has clarified it through the concept note issued for the e-invoicing as well as in its relevant FAQs. Now, for the implementation of e-invoicing, government has made some amendments under the law. Still, we find there are some inconsistencies between the present GST law and the e-invoicing scheme as implemented by the government. Now we will see some inconsistencies, and we will throw light upon that. Documents. As we have seen, e-invoicing is applicable on debit note as well as credit note. So Rule 48 prescribes the manner of issuance of invoice. For the introduction of e-invoicing, Sub-Rule 4 has been inserted under Rule 48 to make applicable e-invoicing. On the other side, Rule 53, which prescribes the manner of issuance of debit note and credit note, there is no such corresponding amendment has been made by the government under Rule 53. So it implies that as of now, if we read the law, e-invoicing seems to be applicable only on the issuance of invoice, but not on the issuance of debit note and credit note. However, on the other side, government has clarified in its concept note of invoice as well as relevant FAQs that the invoicing will be applicable for debit note and credit note as well. Now, availment of ITC. As we know that Section 16 prescribes the conditions for availment of ITC. Rule 36 prescribes a valid documents on the basis of which a buyer can avail ITC. Rule 36 prescribes 5 particulars that are mandatorily required to be available on the invoice to avail ITC. Interestingly, government has made mandatory that on every invoice, IRP signature, IRN, QR code and other particulars will be mandatorily required to be printed. On the other side, there is no such corresponding amendment has been made under Rule 36. It implies that by reading law, we can infer that if the IRN number and IRP signature is not present on the invoice, buyer can still claim ITC on such invoice. These were the major inconsistencies between the GST law and the e-invoicing schema.
Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee.
Now, let's understand the process flow of the invoice. E-invoice means the invoice generated at the GSTN portal. Is it so? Interestingly not. A taxpayer is required to generate e-invoice in their own ERP system. For that purpose, the government has clarified some mandatory particulars which will be a part of new e-invoice schema. After generating the invoice, the taxpayer is required to upload the JSON file of the e-invoice to the invoice registration portal named as IRP. Taxpayers can access the IRP portal at the above below mentioned link. I would like to throw light on two important facts here. Taxpayer can log in this e-invoice portal using their present e-way bill login credentials. They are not required to generate separate login credentials for access to this e-invoice portal. Second thing, government has given the option to the taxpayer to sign or not to sign a JSON uploaded at the IRP portal. It means taxpayer can choose to upload a digitally signed JSON file at the IRP portal, or it can also upload an unsigned JSON file at the IRP portal. Upon of the JSON file, IRP portal will generate a unique invoice reference number and the QR code. It will digitally sign the invoice, and before doing that, it will do some data validation check, like whether the combination of GST number, invoice registration, invoice number, and the financial year provided by the taxpayer is a unique combination. If it will not so, the IRP portal will return an error file to the taxpayer. If there is no such validation failure, then IRP will share the final signed JSON file with the taxpayer. Furthermore, this JSON file can also be used to generate e-way bill. If the taxpayer has provided the transporter's detail in the JSON file uploaded at the IRP portal, then part A of the e-way bill will be generated. Further, if the taxpayer has also provided the document number and the transporter ID in the JSON file uploaded at the IRP portal, then part B of the e-way bill will also be generated. Here, government has clarified that as of now, separate generation of e-way bill will be continued as it is. Further, they have also clarified that in the upcoming time, they are planning to discontinue the separate generation of e-way bill for the taxpayers covered under the limit of e-way bill, e-invoicing. Then, IRP portal will also share the JSON with the GSTN portal, which will update the GSTR1 of the SALI. Now, buyer has received the JSON file of the invoice, buyer has given the option to share the JSON file, PDF file, or the printed invoice as it suits to the buyer and seller to the buyer. So it means seller has the option to provide JSON file, PDF file, or the printed copy of invoice to the buyer. It is not being made mandatory that the seller is required to print e-invoice. Further, if the seller prints the invoice, then it is mandatory for the seller to mention invoice registration number and the QR code on the invoice. Now let's have a look at the sample e-invoice as issued by the government in public domain. As we have seen, that QR code will be mandatorily required to be printed in the e-invoice. This QR code will contain information regarding the GSTN of the supplier, recipient, document number, date of generation, value, number of line items, HSN of the main item, and IRN. Government has also launched an application through which any person can get the particulars of the invoice through scanning this QR code. This QR code will be digitally readable. Further, IRN being also an important mandatory particular of the invoice. IRN is a 64 character number which will comprise of the financial year, document number, and the GST number of the supplier. It will be a unique code for each and every invoice issued across the nation. Then it will followed by the buyers and the sellers detail, and then the description of goods. Here, government has clarified that up to 1,000 line items can be inserted in a invoice. And then it will be signature of IRP will display here. So now let's have a look at the mandatory particulars of invoice. These are some mandatory particulars which are required to be printed on an invoice, including e-invoice. This is being made mandatory by Rule 46 as well as the new e-invoice schema. Now let's have a look at some particulars which are mandatory as per Rule 46 but not yet being made mandatory by the e-invoice schema. Supplier signature. Interestingly, as we know that there is a huge confusion in the industry regarding whether invoice is required to be signed or not. We will express here our view. In our view, proviso to the Rule 46 provides that if an invoice is issued in electronic form under the compliance of IT Act, then it is not required to sign such invoice whether in physically or digitally. The same will apply to the invoice as well. So in our view, if the supplier is issuing e-invoice through mail, then it is not required to sign the e-invoice as per Rule 46. On the other hand, if the supplier is providing the digitally signed copy of e-invoice, then it is required by Rule 46 to sign such invoice. However, government has clarified through its relevant FAQs that it is not required by the taxpayer, by the seller, to sign the invoice, whether it will be a physical copy of invoice. So we see that there is a mismatch between the law and the invoice schema. Second thing, it is mandatorily required under Rule 46 to declare on the invoice whether the tax is liable to be paid under reverse charge. There is no such requirement under the invoice schema. Description of goods is mandatorily required to be declared under Rule 46. Further, there is no such requirement under the invoice schema. And the UQC, like kilogram, liters, it is also not mandatorily required to be declared under invoice schema. On the other side, there are some particulars which are required to be printed on an invoice as per invoice schema, but not yet made mandatory under Rule 46, like version of schema, IRN and digital signature of IRP, and supply code. Now we will walk through some relevant FAQs answered by the government on the practical difficulties faced by the taxpayers in implementation of e-invoice. Reporting HSN codes. Taxpayer is mandatorily required to mention at least 4-digit HSN code on the invoice. Document number should not start with 0, slash, and hyphen. It is mandatorily required to mention the document number in uppercase only. Lowercase letters are not required, are not allowed under invoicing. Printing logo. As we have seen, the seller will upload the JSON file of e-invoice at the IRP portal. There is no placeholder in the JSON schema to print or apply the logo of the seller. However, if the seller still wants to apply its logo, it can do so on the physical copy of the invoice. Printing of QR code. As we have seen that the printing of QR code is a mandatory particular if the invoice is printed. This QR code will be sent as a data string by the IRP portal. It will not send as an image. So the ERP of the seller should be compatible enough to convert that data string into the image. we have seen the need of supply signature. Government has clarified that it is not mandatorily required to sign the copy of e-invoice. Reverse charge cases. It is not being clarified that whether invoice is required to be issued for in reverse charge cases. So suppose a supply a taxpayer has received a supply of services which is covered under the reverse charge. So it is not being clarified whether the self invoicing done for such reverse charge will be mandatorily required to be reported at the invoice portal. In our view, it should be reported because it is also an invoice. Invoicing will also be applicable on zero-rated supplies, and hence IRN number and the QR code will also be required to be printed on the export invoices as well as invoices issued to the SEZ units. Now, amendment. Invoice can be cancelled within 24 hours of its issuance at the IRP portal, and for the next 24 hours it can be cancelled at GSTN portal. Amendment in invoice can be made at GSTN portal only. Further, e-invoice cannot be cancelled until the e-way bill corresponding to that invoice is cancelled. It implies that a taxpayer is first required to cancel the e-way bill relating to a particular invoice, and after that only taxpayer will be allowed to cancel the e-invoice. Further, partial cancellation of e-invoice is not allowed. Need of carrying physical invoice along with e-way bill. Rule 138A provides that if a IRN number is generated, then it is not mandatorily required to carry physical copy of e-invoice. This has also been clarified through relevant FAQs. Now let's have a look at the way forward for the taxpayers, how the taxpayers will implement e-invoice in their business environment. So to start with, government has provided 3 options to the taxpayer to implement e-invoice. They can choose to generate JSON file through an offline utility provided at the e-invoicing portal. In that case, taxpayer will be required to manually punch the data in the utility. That utility will generate a JSON file which can be uploaded at the IRP portal to generate e-invoice. Or a taxpayer can choose to use the services of a ASP or a GSP to integrate its ERP with the IRP portal, or direct integration of ERP with the IRP portal can also be possible. In each and every case, as we have seen, that e-invoicing schema comes up with such mandatory particulars which are not in the present, which are not available, which are not mandatorily required in the current scheme of law. So it is of prime importance for the taxpayer to make its ERP ready for the e-invoicing. It should check its ERP to make addition for that such particulars. As we have seen that e-invoicing, every kind of communication with the IRP portal will be done through JSON format of data. So ERP of the taxpayer should be ready to generate as well as receive the JSON format of data, because as of now, government has not provided any utility which can read the JSON format received from the government and convert it into a readable PDF form. So ERP of the taxpayer should be ready enough to receive the JSON format received from the IRP portal and then convert it into a readable form. Now, if the taxpayer opts to use the services of a ASP or GSP, it is of prime importance to identify such ASP and finalize the ASP so that the integration of data so that the seamless flow of data can be made possible. As we have seen that it is a thorough technical process, training of employees is a very crucial part. That was all on e-invoicing from our side. We have also received some questions from some participants. I hope I have answered all such questions in my discussion. If still some questions remains, the participants can answer that question in our question answer part. Now I will request Puneet to take us through the remaining part of the webinar.
Thank you, Shubham, for comprehensively covering e-invoicing as to what are the contents, to whom they are applicable, is the limit actually 500 crores or lesser amount, what is the way in which you need to prepare yourself from an IT perspective, employee training perspective. So from today's webinar, we'll be taking up live questions from all of you. So once our session is over, if you have any questions, you can raise your hands. We'll unmute you. You can ask your questions, and we'll address your questions live in front of everyone. Coming to next part of our session, which is on recent news. So to start with, the government has dumped the GST new return system. So if you're aware that in the last year also the government was planning to bring a new return system, which was ANX 1, ANX 2 and RET 01. So the government has formally dumped it. The government has decided to modify the existing return system. Very little information is available, but as per news reports, this will be effective from October 2020. In our view, this will be again a big change in everyone's working. So just to explain as to how it is likely to be. So the present system is that a taxpayer, he files his GSTR1 based on the customers, based on its supplier's GSTR1, his GSTR2A gets auto-populated, and thereafter the taxpayer files its GSTR3B return. In the new return system, the taxpayer will firstly file its GSTR1, which will be outward supplies. A new return which is being introduced, which is GSTR2B, in which the purchases ITC details will be captured. This new return has to be made based on GSTR2A. So meaning thereby, if I'm the taxpayer, my suppliers will file their GSTR1. Based on their GSTR1, GSTR2A will get auto-populated. I have to see all those details, etc., confirm in the portal. Thereafter, the return GSTR2B will be generated, which will have all the details of ITC, etc. And based on that, whatever figures I'm indicating in GSTR1 for output, whatever figures I'm indicating in GSTR2B on the procurement side, so GSTR3B will be auto-populated. So if implemented seamlessly, it's a very forward-looking approach. So this should eliminate the need of any differences between GSTR1 and 3B or GSTR2B or 2A and 3B. But yes, at same point of time, it will entail taxpayers to do reconciliations on a real-time basis. They do not have a choice to do reconciliations at the end of year, etc. So this is what the government is planning, and as more and more information comes from the government side, we'll keep you posted on the same. Another development is that the exporters, when they claim GST refund, the government has made invoice matching compulsory, which is 2A, etc., which makes refund claiming process as more tedious and more disputes with the authorities. Thirdly, under GST, a lot of tax refund frauds are taking place. So there are exporters who do not export the goods and illegally try to claim the refund. So in fact, the export body, which is FIEO, it has suggested government to take action against those risky exporters by issuing show cause notices. Another very important change on the custom side is that presently all electronic transmissions of drawing, designs, etc., when it comes through email or in soft form, this is not chargeable to customs duty. This is because of WCO regulations, which were applicable till June 2020. But India is opposing that. India proposes to impose customs duty on all these CAD/CAM files. So in the near future, we'll have more clarity. But yes, the present regime of electronic transmissions being free from customs duty may go away. Nextly, next point is that in our earlier roundup sessions, we discussed that the government is implementing faceless e-assessment on the custom side. They have launched second phase from 3rd August 2020. So for specified products, etc., the facility has been also extended at Delhi and Mumbai custom zones. Coming to the last part, which is the precedents. So many important court rulings have come in last 1 month, starting with our age-old dispute of Tran-1 transitional credit. This is one of the dispute which is not going to die. Every passing week there is some new development. Now the latest is Madras High Court judgment in case of PR Money Electronics. So in this case, the High Court held that ITC is a concession, it's not a vested right, which is against very well settled principles. The High Court dealt with the retrospective amendment and held that the time limit under Rule 117(1) of CGST rules is mandatory. Basis this, the court held that the GST law is correctly prescribing time limit in terms of Section 164. And basis this, the court held that transition of credit beyond specified period, which was 27 December 2017, is illegal. So all the cases have gone to Supreme Court. So Supreme Court will have its final verdict as to whether these credits should be transitioned or not. But yes, as of now, there's an utter confusion on this issue. Another important ruling of Delhi High Court, which has come in case of Jian International. So the case related to refund claim. So the taxpayer filed a refund application and he did not receive any deficiency memo or acknowledgement from the government. Importantly, the GST law mandates issuance of deficiency memo if department feels some documents are missing, etc. They have to mandatorily issue acknowledgement, but in this case, nothing of that sort was issued. The High Court held that issuance of deficiency memo beyond prescribed time limit leads to delay in refund. And secondly, it also impairs taxpayers' right to claim interest for delayed refund. So the court concluded that the deficiency memo cannot be issued at delayed stage. The tax authorities, having failed to issue them, cannot do it now. Very surprisingly, in this case, before Delhi High Court, the revenue pleaded that please permit us to issue deficiency memo now, which was refused by the High Court, and the High Court directed the authorities to grant refund along with interest. So very important ruling. So many of you would have filed refund claims and may not have got any correspondence, acknowledgement, deficiency memos. So this judgment is a correct judgment and comes very handy for you to claim refund as well as interest. Moving further, VKC footsteps, Gujarat High Court, another very important ruling. So in this case, the taxpayer was claiming refund of unutilized ITC on input services. The taxpayer was operating under inverted tax structure. The High Court held that as far as Section 54 is concerned, it talks about refund of unutilized input tax credit. It does not restrict refund to inputs only, whereas the authority's contention was that refund should not be available in input services. The authorities were relying on Rule 89(5) formula, which restricted refund to inputs only. the High Court held that Rule 89.5 is ultra vires Section 54.3 because the parent legislation is not bringing any such restriction. Basis this, the court allowed refund on input services. So many important issues emanate from this judgment. So one, in our view, the same logic should get extended to capital goods also. So if the taxpayers have accumulated credit due to capital goods, again Section 54 does not bar it. They can claim refund of that as well. It will apply to the past also. So apart from claiming refund on capital goods and input services for future, if the taxpayers have not claimed it for the past, irrespective refund claims are at whichever stage, sanctioned, not sanctioned, deficiency memo, challenge and appeals. In all those cases, the taxpayers can file a supplementary refund claim or a fresh refund claim to claim this benefit. A very important issue will come up is that from 1st February 2019, the time limit of filing refund, these refunds have been changed. Earlier, it was end of the financial year, and now it has been changed to the due date of filing refund. In our view, the refund or the time limit governing it being a procedural law. So the law prevailing at the time of filing refund claim needs to be seen. So today when you will be filing refund claim, today's time limit will be seen. Effectively, it will be 2 years from the due date of filing of refund. So in our case, February 18 onwards, all the refund claims can be filed for the past. Last issue is that in case of zero rated supplies also, even though Section 54 does not bar, does not contain any bar, etc., but the refund is only restricted to inputs and input services only. In our view, same logic applies, and for zero rated supplies also, the taxpayers can claim refund on capital goods as well. Moving ahead, Linde Engineering, a service tax judgment. So in this case, the taxpayer was rendering services to its foreign parent company. It satisfied all the conditions of Rule 6A of erstwhile service tax rules. The department's contention was that the foreign parent company qualifies as establishment of the taxpayer. The court held that no, foreign parent company cannot be a establishment of Indian company because it's a distinct legal entity. Basis that it held that taxpayer will be considered to have exported its services. Moving ahead, Repco Home Finance, another very important ruling and equally relevant in GST regime as well. So the case related to taxability of foreclosure charges. In this case, the taxpayer was providing home loans, etc. So the customers had option to foreclose the loan. They can prepay the loan subject to payment of foreclosure charges. The department's contention was these charges should be subject to service tax. The court held that service should be for benefit of another person, whereas in this case, the foreclosure charges do not benefit banks. In fact, the banks lose. Instead of getting interest for multiple years, the whole lending activity comes to an end where a customer forecloses its loans. The court further held that foreclosure charges are in the nature of damages for breach of contract, and these do not qualify as consideration. Basis that the tribunal larger bench came to the conclusion that service tax is not leviable. In our view, another very correct and important ruling in today's context. Same logic will apply to all sorts of disputes happening in GST regime, starting from the notice paid to liquidated damages to penalties, etc. Coming to advanced rulings. So firstly, we have this case of Halliburton Offshore. So the issue was characterization of supply as multiple suppliers or composite supply. So in this case, the taxpayer was providing mud engineering services as well as supplying goods for executing those services. So these goods were mud chemicals, additives, etc. So the authority held that testing parameters for qualifying a composite supply will be whether they're naturally bundled. If one supply is not made, mean supply gets affected. So the authority held that yes, this test is satisfied. But at same point of time, the authority held that these supplies are not made in conjunction with each other. These are not supplied as a package at a single price, because in this case the contract had separate values for goods and services. Basis that, the authority held that this is not a composite supply. In our view, totally incorrect ruling, because here from a customer's perspective, he wanted to get mud engineering services only, and these imported goods were part and parcel of it. So this should have been classified as a composite supply only. Another ruling of Halliburton offshore only. So in this case, the taxpayer was rendering services, and during rendition of services, some equipments were lost or damaged. So the taxpayer was claiming compensation or making recovery of such losses. So the authority held that this activity qualifies as a supply and it should be taxable as supply of goods. Again, in our view, it's totally incorrect ruling, because from a customer's perspective, he never wanted to buy these equipments, etc. For him, it's an additional cost of rendition of services. So the characterization should have been as a main service only. Moving ahead, classification of hand sanitizers, a very popular and essential product nowadays due to COVID-19. So in this case, the authority held that these sanitizers are not medicaments. The taxpayer contended that it's an essential commodity. The authority held that even if it's an essential commodity, it will not have any bearing on the rate of tax. The authority held that it's a disinfectant under HSN 3808 and taxable at 18%. In our view, again, totally incorrect ruling. The Supreme Court has laid down various tests for classifying products as medicaments or not. In our view, the hand sanitizers qualify all those tests and should be classified as medicament only and taxable at 12%. But yes, this is a dispute which industry is facing. There was a news report also that many companies who are charging 12% have got notices. Next ruling is in case of Usha Bala chits. In this case, the taxpayer was a chit fund company. Wherever its customers were delaying the payments, it was charging interest or penalty. So the authority held that whatever recovery is made is in the nature of interest, is in the nature of penalty only, and it should be characterized as principal supply, which was financial and other related services. Basis that whatever is the tax on the main services of 12% should apply here as well. In our view, totally correct ruling. Moving further, Pullery Mining and Logistics. So this dealt with taxability of FOC supplies from service recipient. In this case, the taxpayer was receiving diesel from its clients, which was used by it in the machines for providing services. So the taxpayer's contention was that the value of diesel should not form part of, in this case, the value of diesel was not forming part of the contract value. So the question was whether the value of diesel should be subject to GST or not. The authority held that diesel forms integral component of services, and the value is includable in the value of supply under section 15(2)(b) of CGST Act. In our view, this is an incorrect ruling for the reason that here provision of diesel was a condition of contract under which the client was provided to do so. Therefore, the value of diesel should not have been included. There have been other rulings under GST regime holding so. There was a Supreme Court judgment also in respect of construction contracts, etc., that whenever whenever construction materials are supplied, their value cannot be included. Therefore, this ruling is incorrect. Shilpa Medicare transfer of going concern. In this case, the applicant transferred business from one state to another. The authority held that it is not a supply of goods, it's a supply of service which is exempt. In our view, one of the interesting point in this ruling was that in this case, the business was not sold to any third party. It was just transferred from one place to another. So in our view, the ruling is incorrect to the extent that there was no transfer of going concern which was taking place, because that can happen with a third party only. So it should not have been exempt. The next ruling is Jabalpur Hotels ITC on purchase of lift. So in this case, the taxpayer was running hotels in which the lift was installed. The authority held that lift is a customized mechanism for transporting and designed to suit a specific building. It becomes an integral part of the building. The authority held that it does not qualify as plant and machinery and ITC is not available. In our view, totally incorrect ruling, because the definition of plant and machinery covering equipment apparatus for a particular function is totally satisfied by plant and machinery merely because it is housed in a building, will not disentitle ITC on the same. Then Atrival Amusement Park, a very important and interesting ruling. So in this case, the taxpayer was constructing water park. As far as water slides is concerned, the authority held that it is plant and machinery and ITC is available. The taxpayer also laid down foundation of wave pool machine. The authority held that it forms part and parcel of water slides only, allowed credit on the same. But as far as machine room, which was forming part of the land or land development and swimming pool, and lastly, transformers, electric wirings, fixtures, DG sets, etc., the authority held that this forms part of land or building, which is immovable property, and it is not plant and machinery. In our view, all these items constitute to be plant and machinery, because without this, the whole water park or amusement park cannot run. Therefore, in our view, ITC should have been available on the same. With this, we come to our roundup, and we thank you for joining in that large number. Now, we request you to use the panel, and you can raise your hands. If you have any questions, we can unmute you and take up your questions. You can raise your hands and we can take up your questions. Yeah. So we have Mr. Deepak Lohia. So Mr. Lohia, we are unmuting you. You can ask your question. Mr. Lohia, you can unmute.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Lohia.
Yeah. Sir, always nice to, read the updates of Nithya. It's very interesting and easy to understand, especially the comments, which comes at the end of the update.
Yeah,
sir, I have two questions, sir. One particular question I'm having, I understand there are certain writs which have been filed in High Court with respect to the question of law that IST closing balance credit, any service tax credit which was lying in the IST registration as on 30th June or last return, the departments are issuing show cause notice saying that this will automatically lapse. So, sir, what is the impact in terms of law on this particular aspect? Is there any development? Is there any current ruling which has come? This is the first question, sir.
Sure. And second question?
Sir, second question is with respect to e-invoicing. I wanted to understand whether QR code printing is mandatory for B2B as well as B2C for both the types of supplies. whether it is
Okay.
B2B or B2C, for both the types of supplies, whether QR code printing is mandatory?
Sure.
Sure.
Sure. So, Mr. Deepak,
That's all.
I'll take up your first question and Shubham will answer the second. So, as far as ISD is concerned, yes, the petitions have been filed in Delhi High Court and which have granted stay as well. In our view, legally, ISDs can carry forward the credits. Secondly, yes, we are also handling show cause notices of many of our clients where the credit transition has been sought to be denied. But in our view, these are legally untenable. GST law clearly permits transition of these credits.
Okay, sir, if you can just tell the writ petition number, if we can just read them and understand.
I don't readily have it. So maybe you can send a mail to our corporate communication ID. We'll share that with you.
Sure, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And thanks, sir, for your question. As I also mentioned, sir, invoicing is not applicable for B2C transactions. Invoicing is applicable only on B2B transactions.
Okay.
So,
So
it
that
will
means
not apply to B2C transactions. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Deepak. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next we have Mr. Anil Mishra. Yeah. Mr. Anil Mishra, you can unmute yourself. Mr. Anil Mishra, can you unmute yourself and you can raise your question? Okay. I think we'll move to the next. Mr. Ravichandra G. Sir, can you ask your question?
Yes, sir. Sir, we have sent two missionary for repair to foreign. In one missionary means our vendor has done some, he has replaced some spare parts and done the repair work. And the repair for the item means what he has replaced is cost to 1 lakh, and the service he is charging 4 lakhs. In my bill of entry, I have declared this 1 lakh as in my bill of entry. Now my question is, this 4 lakhs, will it be treated as import of service?
So 4 lakh is what? It's a repair charges?
Yes, sir.
So it will be import of service, but because place of supply is outside India, so there'll be no tax on this.
So in case of bill of entry, then if I declare the only 1 lakh, is that sufficient, right, sir? I need not to declare the 5 lakh.
Sir, as far as bill of entry is concerned, you need to see, what I remember correctly, there's a customs notification which clearly requires inclusion of repair charges. So you need to include that.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So the next question we have is Sindhuja Jaiswal. Ma'am, you can ask your question. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. Sindhuja Jaiswal. Okay, we move ahead. Mr. Satyapal Saini, we are just unmuting you. You can also unmute at your end and ask the question. Satyapal Saini.
Yeah. Hi, Puneet. This is Satyapal. My question is regarding the ITC refund. I have applied a GST refund to the Karnataka authority. They have given the most of the GST fund, but they have disallowed worth rupees around 30 lakh pertain to the capital goods. So my question is that in earlier situation it was already well known that capital goods refund will be not allowed, but you have speaking about it can be claimed. So what is the option for us to get this refund from the authority?
Sir, you are talking about refund of GST only?
Yeah, GST only input.
Okay. So, sir, as far as Rule 89 is concerned, it restricts. But as we explained in our session, that this restriction is not coming from the law. Therefore, in our view, similar to Gujarat High Court judgment, you can also claim capital goods refund. But yeah, you need to fight that case.
Okay. So you meant to say that we have to go to an legal battle till the High Court level, right? Or it's a below authority, it can be settled.
May not be High Court. You can challenge that refund order before Commissioner Appeals and then take it further.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
We'll seek your help, so I will connect with your team. Okay.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Narendra Singh. Sir, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Mr. Narendra Singh.
Puneet, is it audible?
Yeah, you're
Are you getting
audible.
my voice?
Yes, sir.
So first, thank you for organizing such wonderful sessions. And my question regarding e-invoicing. So my question is that if a supplier issue an invoice for supply, and supply attracts under reverse charge, then whether recipient is liable to issue an e-invoice or not.
So thank you, sir, for the question. So, sir, as I explained, the recipient generating the self-invoice is required to generate the e-invoice because it is not yet clarified by the government in its relevant FAQs or the e-invoicing schema. But as the invoicing is applicable on generation of invoice, then it means that the self-invoice generated by the recipient is also required to be reported at the IRP portal. I hope I'm clear, sir.
Yeah. So Mr. Narendra Singh, in our view, it should apply. Hello. Yeah. So next we have Mr. Yogesh Mittal. Mr. Mittal, you can ask your question.
Yeah, so my question is related to invoice. So is there any time limit to generate invoice? Suppose I have an invoice, I generate invoice for today, and can I generate invoice after a week, or is there a time limit?
Yes, sir. Thanks for your question, sir. So it is clarified that e-invoice can be generated for today's date or yesterday date. It means, suppose I have my document date is for the, suppose today is 13th of August. Okay, so on 13th of August, I can generate e-invoice only for the document date for which is not later than 12th of August.
Yeah. So the day is one day. So in your example, you have generated invoice today. So maximum you can generate e-invoice by tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Mr. Ritesh Mehta.
Sir, thank you for the session, first of all. So I have seen two case laws quoted by you with respect to plant and machinery. So first was about lift and another was about some water park. So first,
you can ask a specific question. Yeah.
Right. So first question is like how to determine whether a asset is classified as plant and machinery or not. And second, my specific question is with respect to storage tanks. So whether can we avail ITC on storage tanks or not?
And these storage tanks are made of what material and to store what?
Sir, like I am from petroleum sector, so storage tanks with respect to storage of MS, HSD or LPG, let's say.
Okay. So, sir, to determine whether an item is plant and machinery, we need to refer to GST law, which says that any apparatus, equipment, etc., qualifies as plant and machinery. Then there's a lot of jurisprudence under income tax law and sales tax laws also, which essentially means that it is to serve any purpose, or at some places it has been understood as a mechanical or electrical device that you put any input and then an output comes. So these are the criteria to decide whether an item qualifies as plant and machinery or not. So I may not have ready answer for storage tanks. I need to study a bit and then come to the conclusion. Yeah.
Okay, sir, just to add on, are there any advanced rulings which like defines the apparatus definition or equipment definition or
There are many.
okay.
But most of the advanced rulings are negative only. So they will not tell you the correct legal position.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So so we are end with the questions, and we'll have similar live questions every time. So again, we thank you for joining in that large number, and we'll meet you with our roundup for next month, September. So thank you once again.